Welcome everyone to Coaching in Session. My name is Michael Rearden, and I'll be your mindset coach today. And today we're going to be talking about book coaching. What is a book coach? Do you need one? If you're writing a book, most likely you do. Because I have went through the process of writing a book, the difficulties in writing a book, being consistent, and really driving through to share your idea with the world. And a little bit about me, I remember in 2017, I think I told my family, I said, I'm going to write a book. And it's 2022 right now. And I said, 2017, I'm going to write a book. After I'm writing this book, I'm going to be done, going to give it everyone for Christmas and things like that the next year. I thought I was going to be done in 1 year. Well, there was a problem. I didn't know how to write. I had a lot of ideas. My brain was going 100 miles a minute. But I didn't know how to relay what I wanted to on paper in a way that people would want to read and a way that I would also enjoy reading myself or writing for that fact. So after half a year of me not writing my book, now I wrote some. I would write paragraph here, a page there, but that's not writing. Yeah, you might say I'm still writing a book, but 2018 happened. There's no book. 2019 happened. There was no book. I was like, well, why am I not writing a book? And the reason why is because I wasn't a writer. I had the idea of writing a book. I had the wisdom, I had the knowledge, but I was not a writer. So I said, how can I become a writer? I said, I'm going to start a blog and I'm going to have this blog and I'm going to write once a week. I'm going to write a blog once a week. And I haven't missed a day since 2018, I believe, maybe 2019, where I said, I'm going to write a blog and I'm going to share it. I don't care if anyone takes it. If you take my blog, good. Use it. Let the world understand my words, to learn from them, to become wise. And at that moment, when I said, I'm going to become a writer and I'm going to write a weekly blog, I was creating a routine for myself. I said, I need to have a blog done every single week. So Monday, I will start writing the blog. Tuesday, I would continue writing the blog. Wednesday, I would continue, maybe finish, then start with the editing process. So Thursday, I would edit the blog. Friday, I would read it again, edit the blog. And on Friday, I would schedule the blog. It was a long process for me to do that because I was just thinking about what to say. What am I going to say? How am I going to relay this? And then it wasn't until I did it for months, then a year, that now I'm not taking a whole full week to write a blog. It takes me 1 day. I write the blog in 1 day. It could be 4 pages. It could be 6 pages. It could be 2 pages. Doesn't necessarily matter how long the blog is. I get the blog done very quickly nowadays. And then the next day I edit because now I have a fresh mind. I'm able to think more clearly. I'm not fatigued. And then I can read and then publish my blog. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to give myself a huge ordeal of writing a book by myself. I would definitely need a book coach. So for me, I went a roundabout way to really saying, I want to write a book, but you don't have to go that roundabout way. And my guest, Caroline Malloy, is going to be helping us get a good understanding of how to get from point A to point B the quickest and the most viable way possible. So if you have a book idea, you're going to want to listen to this podcast. If you have tried to write a book in the past and have not been able to complete it, because when you start writing your book, you're going to be invigorated, you're going to be motivated. And then the thing that what happens with motivation is that it kind of dies down because you start to realize, it's a lot of work. Even though you might enjoy writing, there's other things you might enjoy too. Maybe you enjoy watching TikToks or YouTube. There's going to be a bunch of different things that you are doing that you have to figure out. All right, cool. And then you figure out the solution. So if you're stuck and you need a solution, check out this episode and this interview with Caroline and myself. Welcome, Caroline Malloy, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I want to thank you so much for coming on. I have you as a former educator, a former fitness coach, and now you are a book coach. In your own words, can you please maybe talk about a little bit about your past experiences and then the work you do now as a book coach?
Sure. So I have, like many of us, taken a long road to where I am, and each step has really built on the next. The thing that I've learned the most is that really I just like to talk a lot. And so that thread runs through my entire career. I started as a high school teacher, and then I went and got my PhD in history. So I taught university history and lifelong learning and picked up fitness instruction along the way. I absolutely loved coaching people in the fitness studio, which unfortunately with the pandemic, that goes by the wayside as so much does. And in the last few years, I have been working as a historian for a cruise line. And on board, people would come up to me with book manuscripts. And for reasons that I didn't understand, they would say, hey, something about you makes me think I can trust you with my story. And this happened a lot. And so as the pandemic hit and so many of us pivoted to something new, I was landlocked and home and realized this was the time to look into for myself the opportunity to help people with their stories. And so over the last few years, I have built up a business working with writers, particularly of nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, memoir, although sometimes a little kind of taken from real life sort of fiction. And I have begun to support writers at all stages of their story, from coming up with their story to trying to get it polished so they can get it published, and really helping them turn their book into something that is real and something that will matter to history. That's what I always say to my clients. Like, my perspective as a historian and an educator is that your book is something that people will read someday and it will make a difference. And so you should write it.
Similar to me, I was an educator before I became a mindset coach. And it's always interesting because I always thought like, oh, I have to be in a classroom and that's my purpose in life. When really my passion was educating, teaching, and it doesn't matter what I taught. So I can teach basketball. I'll be perfectly fine with that. I could teach kindergarten or high school, college. It doesn't necessarily matter the point, as long as I'm able to speak, to educate, and to help people gain a better understanding of something that they might be passionate in. And maybe what happened when you're on that cruise line is that people were passionate about what they were writing and they wanted to find someone who's passionate also. And being a historian, you're going to be looking deep, diving deep into the past, reading a lot, I'm sure. And then you're always going to be looking for, wow, that's interesting, because there's a saying that history repeats itself. Look at fashion, for example. We might have bell bottoms in the 60s and 70s. And then in 2010, it's like, okay, bell bottoms came back for a little bit. So it kind of like it always repeats itself. And I think if you can get a good understanding of history and a good foundation on education as a whole, you can really plan better, right? And I think that planning is critical thinking. So critical thinking today is one of those things that many people, I want to say, shy away from, where if it can be easy, they would love easy. But critical thinking is something that people really have to look at nowadays and really take some time to say, okay, what is the cause and effect of what I'm doing? And I think the people who are writing that book have a high level of critical thinking. Maybe in your experience, can you maybe dive into critical thinking on some of the people that you're working with or have worked with in the past, and how their mind is maybe different than how modern society is?
Well, I think if we're talking about critical thinking, the first thing that comes to mind for writers is actually the opposite. And it's not what you were, I think, referencing there with critical thinking, but they're often critical in their thinking of themselves. Mm-hmm. But these are people that I meet whose stories are just amazing. And they are thinking about sharing that story in a way that maybe many of us don't. I tell my clients all the time, I have no interest in writing a book. I wrote a dissertation once. That is enough for me. I don't see my story that way. But writers do. Even someone who's never written a book, if you are thinking about writing a book, you're already thinking differently than I am. And that's already such an impressive and powerful way to think about your story, because something is pulling you, whether it's a memoir and your own story, whether it's a self-help book that you're writing, or a nonfiction story about something that you've become the authority on. It's your passion. It's the thing that you love. Lots of people have those passions and never think, oh, I'll write a book about it. But for those who do, you're seeing the world and you're seeing your space in the world so differently. And people get nervous, I think, at that moment of like, oh, but should I write it? I'm not a writer. So many people tell me I'm not a writer. But if I'm already talking to you, you are. You don't wind up talking to a book coach if you're not already somewhere inside recognizing that you're a writer and seeing the world like a writer, right? You don't find yourself working with a mindfulness coach like yourself unless you're already thinking about like, this is a space I need in my life. Something here is calling me. And so I do think that the writers that I work with are not just seeing the world a little bit differently, but seeing their space in the world differently and coming to terms with the fact that their story matters. My work as a historian, you talked about kind of how history repeats itself. Yes, definitely. And I'm glad bell bottoms came back because I love them. The other piece of it, from my perspective, is that history for too long has been dominated by the big stories, right? By important people or important moments. But as a historian myself in my own work, I always go looking for the stories of what we'll call everyday people, stories that aren't famous and aren't loud and aren't obvious. And so what I think is wonderful about my writers that I work with is that they're adding pieces to this like big history, capital H history, but they're doing it in such an important way because it's so often overlooked. Like I would much rather find out what was life like during the pandemic and read the stories of individual people and all of their different multitude of experiences than to sit down 10 years from now and read some scholarly book on like, this is what life was like. And here's the economic situation. And here's the politics. Like doesn't tell you anything about anybody. And so I love the fact that there are writers who feel compelled to add their story to that collection.
Yeah. And I know the definition or the kind of the way I was talking about critical thinking kind of left you on two paths. Do I talk about this way critical thinking or this way critical thinking? And I kind of leave it up to the guests when I give a broad explanation of what I'm looking for. They can go any direction they want. This is what I love about speaking with coaches because their mindset, the way they think, that's new, right? I have never had a book coach like yourself on coaching a session. So this is going to be a breath of fresh air for everyone, especially for people who might be on that borderline of wanting to write a book. Our experiences are all going to be different. My experience is going to be different than your experience. And my neighbor's experience is going to be different, even though we live in the same vicinity. People are going to have different lives. We have different bodies. We have different ways of interpretation, and trauma is going to be one of those things also that people see differently. And going back to the pandemic briefly, the pandemic was very traumatic for some people where they might not know how they were going to pay their rent, their mortgage, how they were going to homeschool their kids, and they have to work to provide food, shelter, security. And now they have all these new tasks that they didn't have before. So that trauma was something that they had to learn to deal with. And many people overcame it. Many people showed up and they said, I rose to the challenge and I was triumphant. And I think that's like the hero story. It's like we were given a bad hand and we made it work. And I think of critical thinking as someone who's able to see a problem, see a solution, and really dive deep into their potential and give everything they have. Because if we think about it, they didn't have to homeschool their kids. They didn't have to pay their mortgage or things like that because we had the mortgage forbearance. But they were people who said, I'm still going to pay my mortgage. I'm still going to work and I'm still going to educate my children. Those people really pushed themselves during those times. Now they have a story to say, okay, I was able to do it. Why aren't other people able to do it? It's not saying that other people should be this person who's almighty and all this energy, because again, every situation is different. I want everyone to be aware of that. But when a person becomes 100% committed to something, it's hard to stop them. Where they say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to have a story to tell. When we get to that story, it's kind of like we are almost obligated to say, hey, this is my story, so other people can take that too. Again, I'm not saying you have to write a book. Similar to yourself, Caroline, right. You don't want to write a book. I like writing books. So I have a book that I already wrote. It's going to be in the publishing phase, either end of this year or next year. So I'm already starting that process because my life has led me to that, where I believe I have some things to share. And I know many other people have things to share. I love reading books because you get a different and unique perspective. Exactly. And I want to talk about, why do you think people are able to offer a different, unique perspective when most of the things that we're being given in our day is kind of like the same thing? So think of like routines, for example, where we wake up, We go maybe to the gym, we go to the store, we maybe have work after breakfast, whatever. And then we come home and we do like the same thing, rinse and repeat every single Monday through Friday. That's our schedule. Saturday, Sunday, maybe we get to relax. What makes people say, okay, well, my story is different. My story should be told?
Well, I think you started by talking about trauma. I think that's something that creates a fracture in that rinse and repeat routine. And it doesn't have to be massive trauma. I mean, you gave the example of, persevering through the unexpected in a way that maybe other people are doing, but for you, it lands and you feel it in a particular way. And so when that rinse and repeat cycle breaks, you've made a set of choices and you've done something differently. And so you have that new story to tell. And often in then speaking to other people and recognizing difference, right? The lessons that you learned, you begin to see something, or some people begin to see that the way that they made a particular set of choices might help someone else, or a lesson that was learned might help someone else, or maybe it won't. And sometimes it's a cautionary tale. Don't do this, right? Here's a set of circumstances. And any good book is going to have the reader empathize. And it doesn't matter if you are reading science fiction and fantasy, or you're reading a memoir, or you're reading a how-to book. There's something in there that as a reader, you feel it's even if it's unfamiliar but with hints of something that you're like, oh, this is close, right? Therefore the grace of God go I, right? So I think there is something to the fact that sometimes when your daily story breaks, people feel pulled to tell that story. But also regarding critical thinking, I think it's also the idea that people are thinking critically about those differences in their lives, right? Stopping and recognizing, well, this difference is something that could help someone, and not in a kitschy Facebook and social media way, right? If you want to just tell everybody what you did right and how happy you are, that's what social media is for. But if you want to dig deep into what matters and where maybe the wrong choice was made, or where something was learned the hard way, or where a challenge was overcome in a way unexpected, well, you're not going to throw that out on social media because we all want to look shiny and happy. But you are maybe going to write it down and work with that and battle through it. And as a coach, that's a lot of what I do with writers, particularly memoir writers, who are feeling like something changed in their life, something unhooked at some point, and the story that they have lived with from that moment, positive or negative or everything in between, they need to get that out there. And so we work together to identify what about it a reader will empathize with. What is the universal thing that you went through? If you kind of step back from yourself and say, all right, this was the actual details of the event. And a lot of writers come to me and say, these are the details. This is what happened. And I say, yeah, but things happen to me all the time. Things happen, like you said, Michael, things happen to my neighbor all the time. They don't feel it the way that you do in this moment, you, the writer who's come to talk to me, right? They don't feel it that they need to tell the story. It's just not, they're not thinking it over and mulling it over and thinking, well, there's something here. And so we work to figure out what that core universal thing is that the writer's already kind of instinctively identifying about that break in their rinse and repeat routine. And then from there, realizing what your story can do for someone else. Now you have your specific situation, but you've recognized how it matters to someone else, or how it can matter to a bigger picture of history. And now you can write towards that goal. And in some ways, it can be a real liberating lift. It no longer has to be, that daily sequence like you were talking about. I get up, I go to the gym, I have breakfast, I do this, and then something happens. Yeah, but that sequence of events, step back, let yourself be a character on a page, someone that we can all empathize with as readers. Now you can begin to build a story from it. It can be healing in a lot of ways. And again, trauma, little t, big T, however you want to talk about it, that thing that happened in your life is something that you need to resolve, and you can through the story.
When we give a definition to maybe knowledge and wisdom, I talk about it quite a lot on the podcast because there is a big difference. If we're looking at knowledge in the sense of books, we're going to be looking at maybe college textbooks, books for elementary school, things like that. But when we talk about books that are filled with wisdom, it's going to be the story of the person. What was my perspective on this? And I always have been a lover of wisdom because I can read books on knowledge all day long, but it doesn't necessarily give me maybe an example of, okay, I shouldn't do this, because they're giving me the blanket statement. example I like to do. You can read How to Ride a Bike. It's a book, How to Ride a Bike. You're not going to be able to ride a bike. You
Right.
need that wisdom, getting on the bike, feeling how wobbly it is, creating that balance, and then riding the bike. And when we sometimes meet someone, it doesn't have to be through a book. It could be in life. It could be through a podcast. Some of the best moments of wisdom that I have ever experienced in my life have been shared with a person I've never met, an author. Just hearing their story, hearing what they went through. And then maybe even also saying, if I had to do this again, this is what I would do differently. Then it's like I'm thinking in my head, okay, let me start to critically think now. All right, if I'm in that situation, what would I have done first? And then the aftermath, what would I have done differently? So I'm giving myself different scenarios. So there's things that we can do to mitigate damage in our life. For example, jumping off a cliff without a parachute is probably a bad thing, where we don't necessarily need, okay, well, let me jump off a cliff to make sure I can't fly first before I say, okay, I need a parachute. When a person has a set amount of wisdom, and I think we all have wisdom in a certain regard, it's just sometimes people, they don't necessarily see it as wisdom. They just see it as their life. What that does is it stops future generations from stopping and making the same mistakes, which I think is important, because if we know that something is bad and we tell our children, our grandkids, hey, don't do this, and then they say, okay, great. But if we don't tell them, then there's maybe a higher probability that they're going to make that mistake because we didn't give them that wisdom.
That's your history repeating itself all over again.
Exactly. So what I wanted to get from you is maybe your definition of knowledge and then wisdom, and then how it ties into the storytelling process.
Well, I think you just gave such a great example of this idea of empathy that I was talking about, that you read a book and you meet an author on the page. And I don't mean you, I mean you particularly, clearly, but also we, in general, readers, meet authors on the page, and that wisdom is imparted, that sense of having lived an experience, come through the other side, and learned a greater lesson from it. But what makes, I think, a really good and powerful story is when an author is able to figure out how to convey that to you, the reader, without saying, do it my way. And wisdom is, I think, has a component of kindness to it on the page, a component of grace and space for someone else's perspective. I think there's a profound difference between a self-help book or a memoir or narrative nonfiction that says, I did these things, X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to tell you the exact way to fix the problem. And if you follow these steps, you will come to the same ending that I did. That's not going to be a book that is going to really, I think, empower or compel people, because it's not a book of wisdom, to use your word there. It's a book of ego. It's a book that says, I have knowledge, but I'm not going to share it in a way that will help. And wisdom is, I think, very help forward. The space to recognize that what a writer has gone through and then puts on the page needs to leave a way for people to learn in their own way from that. And I think wisdom from a writer's perspective is recognizing that your story needs to be bigger than you, so that a reader, any reader, can pick it up and recognize a piece of themselves in it. It's a hard space, I think, to find as a writer, but the good books, if you think about them, leave space for you to apply it to your own very different life experience. Leave space for you to take that lesson and turn it around and use it in an environment that the writer probably never anticipated. And I mean, you can think about classic books that are, from generations before us that we can read today and take a lesson from. Well, that's because the writer has left space for that. The writer is wise enough to know, all right, my story needs to be on the page for the reader to learn something from it. But I'm not going to tell the reader what they have to learn. I'm not going to limit the possibility.
When it comes to education, it's kind of like leaving things up to interpretation is a good thing, because if I just teach people to do it my way, then they're going to do it my way. But if you leave it up to, well, this is the safe way to do it, this is kind of what we're looking for, you might find an alternate way to do things. For example, let's say your favorite store is Walmart. So Walmart is your favorite store. I'm sure there's multiple ways you can get to Walmart from your home. You can take a left, you can take a right, If you're on a dead end street, make sure you don't turn onto the dead end street though. So go off into the main road and then try different ways. Education is like that. I had a kindergarten teacher when I was doing my internship for my master's. She was such a pragmatic teacher. It looked like her classroom was filled with chaos, but it was controlled chaos.
Mm-hmm.
You would go in that classroom and you never wanted to leave. It's just because the way she did it was so magnetic. And she allowed the kids to be free. And they learned and they enjoyed that type of learning. But the other two kindergarten teachers, they were very routine. They're very structured. Not saying that the kids were not getting education or a bad education in one class versus the other. What I'm saying is there's a difference into how they were thinking. So they still got their education. They still did the curriculum. But now we have a room full of pragmatic learners, which now they're going to see things of, okay, well, if I do this, what happens? Versus, oh, this is the right way. It's a big difference. And I was always interested in becoming that type of teacher, being pragmatic. Now, of course, you have to have rules and expectations just to make sure you have structure in your classroom. But when you can figure out that there's multiple ways to get to a solution, why not teach that? And it kind of leads me into the idea of we sometimes might see something as crazy. For example, going to the moon. In the 1800s, if you said, I'm going to fly to the moon, everyone would have thought you were crazy. In the 1800s, if you said you're going to have a phone that's the size of a brick that can fit in your pocket, they would have thought you were crazy. If you said in the 1800s that, oh, I'm going to have an automotive car that can take me from A to B, they would have thought you were crazy. But it took someone crazy to say, you know what? I'm going to create this. Even though there was no believers, even though it wasn't out there yet, there was someone that came up with that idea. I find that when people are writing a book, they have an idea that might never have been said before. And I think we do a disservice as society by almost encouraging people to conform. We say, hey, you have to do this, you have to wear this. You might have someone with a brilliant mind who has this so far-fetched idea that if they say it, they're going to be labeled crazy. They're going to be labeled a psycho. And what that does to the person is they say, you know what, I'm not going to share my idea. What do you say to those people who have that idea that might be so far-fetched, but you know deep inside that they might be that person who can make that idea come to life?
First of all, I just want to say, when you've referenced that kindergarten teacher, I had a colleague, a sixth grade science teacher, who had that same idea. He had chaos in his classroom, and I would walk in and I would be like, I don't know what you're doing. There was order to the chaos. And I think it's a really great metaphor for writing, which is that you want your reader to get to the end, but you don't want them necessarily to notice that you're pushing them there, right? That kindergarten teacher that you knew, that science teacher that I know, had the same curriculum goals as the other teachers, but was really allowing kids to explore their way and just gently guided those kids without those kids realizing to the same conclusions, and let them think so much more creatively and so much more beyond, I think, in terms of the possibilities of imagination, and allowed them to come up with new ideas that maybe are outside of the standard. I think writers frequently are creative, expansive individuals who are thinking about things in new and exciting ways, and frequently bogged down by worrying, well, this isn't the way everyone has always done it. In the publishing industry today, I think on the one hand, it encourages conformity, because you have like the big 5 publishing houses that just want the same kinds of books. And there is this belief amongst writers to be that you have to conform to a certain style or a certain type of book if you want to be published, and published means only a certain thing. And it's very limited, and it's very narrow, and it's very exclusive. You know, if you are outside the norm, it's going to be a very discouraging and demoralizing space. But one of the things that's really wonderful, and that I talk to with a lot of writers, is that the publishing industry broadly, if we want to call the industry just any way to publish a book, well, this is the best moment to be in for that. This is the best moment to have that idea that you think is different or unusual and to write it, because there are so many opportunities to share that story today. I mean, you talked about in 1800, you couldn't think of flying to the moon, or you couldn't imagine having a telephone, let alone one in your pocket in the 1800s. I mean, first of all, books are, probably not something that a lot of people have. I have a shelf full of them. This would have been very unusual in the 1800s for me to have so many books, perhaps. Back then, there's only one way to publish. Today, for writers who come to me, and I have a writer that I'm working with right now who has a really visual take on her story. And what she's working on, she's thinking of it not just in the words on the page, but also in what those pages physically will look like. And a standard publisher is not going to be remotely interested in anything outside the norm like that. But there are so many self-publishing opportunities and hybrid publishing opportunities and digital publishing opportunities, but ways in which writers with a story that maybe doesn't conform to our traditional definition of it can find a space for that book that they still feel compelled to write. And I think that's really such an exciting space to be in right now as a writer. And that fear of what next should be something that's something I work with my writers on, to let that fear go. Yes, maybe in a dream world, you want to be on the New York Times bestseller list, and that's great. And I'm not going to blow up your dream, and I'm going to encourage you and cheer for you. And I will like wallpaper my walls when you are on that New York Times bestseller list for it. But that isn't a definition of success. A definition of success is your story out there in the world in a way that you are so proud to share it. And so it might be Amazon Digital. It might be hybrid publishing, which is a really big and interesting space right now, where it's kind of the in-between space where you do some of it on your own, and then you have professionals that come in and help you do other things. And there's just such a range of opportunities that success finally, can I say finally? Success is finally something that as a writer you can have regardless of where you fall in that norm. Like you were talking about, Michael, where you fall on what, one set of very particular narrow gatekeepers have decided matters.
And success, the definition is so broad nowadays. It's like, if you want to be successful, you have to have $1 million. If you want to be successful, you have to have a big house or this type of car or this type of phone or these type of clothes. So success is going to be individually defined by you. So if the success for you is being able to wake up, go to work, provide for your family, come home and have a loving and caring family, and that's success for you, you might not have a car. You might not have a vacation every year, but you are still happy. You still have people who love you, and that's success for you. Don't let anyone take that away, because what success is for you is only for you. The world has a blanket statement of what success looks like, but when we really get down to the nitty and gritty, you define what success is for you. And it's going to be different. Success for me is different. And I don't want you to have my definition of success, because if you look at my definition, it's like, okay, I'm going to go get Michael's definition of success. You're going to find that maybe down the road that you're not happy. I spoke with many people. I worked with many people who have this idea of what success is. And they say, I'll be happy when my book is the New York Times bestseller. Okay. When it happens, are you any happier? No, I'm not. So it's kind of like, what was success then, right? Where do you define happiness? I tell people typically that it's not so much about the destination, it's about the journey. It's about the experience.
It's about the story.
It's about the story, because that is what makes it. You're not going to want to watch a movie where you turn the movie on, you see a happy family, and then the movie ends, because the happy family is the ending and the beginning. There's a part in that movie where it's kind of like turmoil, where there's a hiccup, where there's some type of tragedy that happened that you want to learn from experience and see what happens as the end result. And that is success. But then we get into the trust aspect of wanting to write a book.
Yes.
You might not have an idea that maybe is popular. You might have an idea that you're afraid to share with the world or anyone, to be honest. I remember when I first started writing my blog, I was like, I don't want to write a blog because I don't know what people are going to say about it. And I don't want people to steal my idea. And then it wasn't until I relinquished those ideas that I gave myself. Someone's going to steal my words. Someone's going to use my words against me. Well, they're my words. So I have that freedom. I'm going to write. I had to be brave. I had to be courageous. And I think many people who begin that journey for book writing have to have that aspect too. They have to be brave. They have to be courageous. And they have to have that aspect of trust in themselves first, and then looking for maybe a manager, a book coach like yourself, someone who's going to help you along the process, especially if you have not written a book before, because there is a lot of things that go into writing and publishing a book that you might have not have thought about. And it's not to, take a jab at you. It's just that what you don't know is what you don't know. I remember when I was going through my personal development stage and I did everything by myself, but I did it through books and through the internet. It took me a very long time. If I had a book coach, if I had a publisher, if I had a manager helping me along the way, I would get everything done a lot quicker. And it's just vice versa in coaching. The same thing. You can get things done quicker. So if you're at a standstill in your book, if you are thinking about writing a book and you need a little bit of courage, a little push, then yes, a book coach is going to be there to support you. And I think we shy away from support. We say we have to do it by ourselves. We have to take this burden and we have to push through and we're going to do it by ourselves. And it might make the story a little bit better, but there's going to be maybe a necessary trial and error when you can have someone who has already done it, is already experienced, and then you can kind of speed up the process. Because when you get one book out, guess what? Now you have freed yourself and you can write your next book. Because if you write one book, it's very contagious. You say, all right, I got to write another book and then another book. And before you know it, you have as many books as Harry Potter. I wanted to maybe get some of your experience with having clients and then building that trust with them. And then after that trust is built, what were they like before and then after?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And I think your example that you can do it all on your own is true. I mean, I think a coach is not the essential piece of success and success. I'm glad you brought it up, that it is something that I think societally, at least in the States, we are so driven to believe that it's only successful, it's only worth it if we do it all on our own. And there's something to that, like pick yourself up, do it by yourself, don't ask for help culture that's really toxic. But even on a small level, I always say to my clients, the reference that I make is running a marathon, right? Really basic coaching. That you can finish, you can get to mile 26.2 all on your own using the internet training and using books that you read, or simply just showing up every day and running. You can get to the finish line. But if you maybe want to get there better, or you want to get there with less pain and less, stress fractures and plantar fasciitis, maybe you go to a coach, and that coach is not going to guarantee that you're going to win the marathon. But the coach is going to say, hey, I know that if you do these exercises this week, it's going to help you reduce your injury. And I know that if you run these number of miles, and I'm going to be there and I'm going to cheer you on, that you'll feel stronger by the time you get to race day. And what I do as a coach for writers is, I think, really a similar thing, which is that writers have a goal, write the book. As a coach, my role is not to write the book for them, not to guarantee the New York Times bestseller list, but to say, hey, when you are trying something new, which maybe it's writing the actual book, maybe it's revising a draft of, maybe you did go and do it all on your own and you sat there and you sat at your computer and you hammered out your first draft and now you're like, now what? And you come to me. My job as your coach is to help you do what you need for your success. And you asked about trust. And one of the ways that I try to build trust with my writers is to focus from the very first time that we meet on what their definition of success is. I say, and this is very true, that my job is that when you are writing and you are eyeballs deep in that chapter and you can't come up for air and you're just dragging yourself to put the next words on the page, you can trust that I'm there cheering you on, remembering what you told me, what you know is important about this story. I'm the person who's going to keep track of those goals for you. I'm going to be the person who knows what matters to you about this story, who knows how you've defined success, so that when you are bogged down on those pages and you can't remember, or when you go online and you read some blog that says success now has to be this, then you come back to me and I say, yeah, that's great for them. But remember that conversation that we had? And I'm going to remind you of your hopes and your dreams for your story. I'm going to always make those my first priority, because there's going to be days when your own life gets in your way. That, I think, is how I try to foster trust with writers, by always being the person that remembers who they are in their story, because that is so easily lost when you're writing, when you feel hopeless, when you feel imposter syndrome. A coach is there to just say, okay, you can feel that way, but let me give you a tip to get past that. Or, you know what? Sometimes you're having that day. That's okay. Take a rest day, right? Using that sports metaphor. You're feeling a little injured emotionally. You're feeling that, the words aren't just flowing. There's something's a glitch. It's no different than when a runner goes to a coach and says, hey, my 5-mile run this week, it hurt. It didn't work. And the coach is going to say, all right, so let's slow down. Let's figure out why. And the coach isn't going to derail you from your goals, but they're going to come up with new strategies for when you get stuck. And that's what I do for writers, is help them with strategies to get unstuck. But always my number one goal is to remember what your number one goal is as a writer. I know in talking to writers, it's something that they know they can trust me with, is, their story is their story, but I'm always going to remember the goal of why they are doing the hard work. Michael, you know yourself, having written your book, like, it's hard work. And sometimes you think, like, is it worth it? And my very first meeting with every client is to figure out why it's worth it for you. What do you want out of this? And everything we do from that day forward is towards that goal.
One of the things that I like to say is that you only need one person to believe in yourself, and that is you. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have another person as the backup or as your biggest cheerleader, it's a little easier, especially in those moments where you start doubting yourself. You said imposter syndrome, all of those negativities, limiting beliefs that start to really weigh heavy on you. Sometimes it can make you quit. Sometimes it can make you run away. But if you have someone right there that's holding you accountable and really giving you that push to help you get to your goals and to your dreams, that's an asset in your corner, because there's not many people who want to see you successful. As much as I hate to say that, people only care about themselves typically. If you go out to the store, most likely people are not going to say, hey, are you feeling good? Can I pay your grocery bill? How's your bank account? Do you need a refill anywhere? No, they don't do that. Everyone has their own life. Everyone has their own problems. Everyone's looking for their own solutions. So we put a lot of trust in ourselves. We give ourselves a lot of responsibility. And sometimes it can be a lot, that burden. And when you have a coach, that coach can take away some of that burden. They can give you that encouragement. They can give you that push that, again, you might not necessarily need, but they're going to know when you need it. So when they see that you're detracting a little bit, you're not writing what you're supposed to write for the week or the month or however you have it structured, they say, hey, what's really going on? And then we can dive deep. Because it's not so much of, hey, we need to get this book done by this deadline. You say we need to get this book done by this deadline. We will go at your pace. We will see where you are today, and we'll do the utmost we can that day. I think taking things a day at a time is important, and it's really going to create a foundation of a healthy body and a healthy mind, because you're not forcing yourself and you're not detracting from other areas like your family or your career. You're still writing your book, but you're not sacrificing yourself. Going back to like the runner analogy, if you're running 5 miles and you're getting hurt, forcing yourself, and then you get hurt somewhere, and then now you're getting ready for the marathon or for the track meet, and you can't even run because you injured yourself. So sometimes looking at the whole picture, and it's difficult sometimes. That's why having a coach even behind you will be able to see all your blind spots and will set you up for success. So if I can from you, Caroline, please share any last words. It could be about what I just said, about anything that you wanted to talk about today. The floor is yours for your last words. After that, please share how people can find you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think what you were saying about setting goals is so important. The number of writers who come to me, and like I said, the first conversation we have is, what is your success? What are your goals? What do you want for your book and for you out of this? And they say, well, I want to be published by this date, or I want to have a book that does this. And it's really rooted in like some external definition of success. And to a person, I will say, well, that's great, but I'm not going to be able to help with that. That's probably not a good way to go about doing this. And I can think of a couple writers who had arbitrary days. I need my book done by this point. And I would say, okay, but let's talk about the real thing that matters about your story, which isn't being published by that date. The real thing that matters about your story is the thing that is driving you to write it. What about your life will be different and successful because this book is finally on the page and no longer living in your head, is finally published in whatever form you decide is going to be the successful form of published for you, instead of living inside you. I think having the space to take that breath is so important for writers, to step away from that kind of rat race of publishing and goals and deadlines. It's not that we don't have deadlines when I work with writers. I mean, we work on a certain number of pages every couple of weeks and every month, and we trade them back and forth. But like you said, if you don't get to those pages, I'm here to talk about why you didn't and what's the block and what's the challenge, because your writing should bring you joy. And if it's no longer bringing you joy, what's holding it back? What's holding you back? And so as a coach, being there to always be the number one cheerleader, not just of the book on the page, the story on the page, but also all of the emotional everyday life that goes into the space to write it, to find the space, whether you've got kids and you're trying to write it amidst their school schedules, or whether you have your full-time work or whatever else it is. There's so many pieces of your life that go into finding the space and finding the peace with yourself to write the story. And as a coach, I really do see my job as to be there when the everyday life gets you back and holds you back. That running injury thing is a really great example. I mean, I can say in my own personal experience, I haven't run a marathon in a decade, because the last time I did, I ran it all on my own and I got a stress fracture and I was so incredibly injured that I've never been able to run another marathon. And if I had had a coach who recognized the stress fracture, I'd still be running marathons. And so a coach can be helpful when you least expect it. I love the fact that I get to work with people who are optimistic and inspired on a daily basis. As a book coach, like I said at the beginning of our conversation, this came to me because people were bringing me stories and saying, I think I can trust you with my story. And I do not lose sight of the incredible honor that is, that people trust me to tell a story that maybe they haven't told anyone else before. And they trust me to cheer for them and to hold on to their goals for them through that process. And whatever part of that process they need me for, it might not be for the whole book. Maybe it's just for one part of their process. But it really has truly been a wonderful transformation for me, from high school teacher to college professor to book coach, where I get to see these stories come to life and to be that cheerleader and to be so proud of everybody whose story gets out there. And I absolutely love that opportunity and that honor. People can find me. My website is The Right Malloy, and it's right. It's a pun. It's, who doesn't love a good book pun? WRITE, therightmalloy.com. And I'm on social media with that handle at The Right Malloy. And on my website, one of the things I think I said earlier, that a lot of people come to me and say, I'm not a writer. And I remind them, like, if you're looking at me, if you're on my social media, if you come to my website, I have a secret for you. You're already a writer. So actually, if you go to my website, you can sign up and actually get a guide that I have up on my website that is 10 steps that you can make to start identifying essentially as a writer. What are the little things that you can do aside from writing your book that allow you to step into your writing space? And one of those things is to simply start talking about being a writer and talk about your story. Put it on Twitter or Instagram, or go introduce yourself at your favorite local bookstore as someone who's writing a book. Booksellers love authors. They don't care whether or not you've published 50 books or none at all, but start having conversations with people on social media and in real life, saying it, kind of embracing that affirmation for yourself of, I'm a writer, and try it on and step into that space as you begin to write your book. Thank you, Michael, for giving me the time to talk today.
Of course. So I will have all your information in the description box below so people can easily find you. If you have a book, if you have an idea that you would like to turn into a book, or just to maybe find someone that you can trust with maybe some of your deepest, darkest secrets. I think Caroline is going to be a wonderful person to share and open up to, because it takes a lot to really find someone and say, you know, I'm going to trust you with my idea, because we live in a world where you could tell someone in your family, maybe a best friend, where you have this idea and they say, that's a silly idea. And it brings you down and you're like, well, yeah, I guess they're right. But maybe they're not right. When it comes to limiting beliefs, those limiting beliefs that other people give you are not yours. You need to make sure that if someone says no to you, or that something is silly or something is dumb or stupid, you find someone who's going to say, you know what, I love that idea. And then you run with it. When you find that person, and you build that trust with them, they're also going to be the same person to say, you know what? Maybe we should go in this direction. Maybe we should detract from that, because they have your best intention at heart. Just from speaking with Caroline today, I can tell that all the people she has worked with, all the people she has met, all the people who have came up to her with their books and manuscripts saying, hey, can you read this and can you give me some input? She has gave them the utmost care, because when we're putting our emotions on the page, it's for the world to see. And we all have a story to tell. You just have to ask yourself, are you ready to write your story and tell the world? I would like to thank you so much, Caroline Malloy, for coming on Coaching in Session. A huge pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Of course. All right, everyone, I'd like to thank you so much for watching the interview with Caroline and myself. If you are in the realm or in the idea of writing a book, becoming a published author, she's going to be someone that you can share your ideas with. And then after that, you can really come to the conclusion, do you want to write another book? And most people get the itch, or they say, oh, I wrote one book and I got to write 5 more. Similar to how when you start a business, you're like, oh, I got to do this business venture and this one. It's addicting. Not because we have an ego and we want everyone to think the way we want. It's just that our story is so unique, and our story has the ability to help someone. It doesn't have to be the world. It could be one person. And I've read books where after reading the book, my life was saved. And it might not seem like you would have a book like that immediately, but when you're done writing, that book can be the key to someone's success, someone's healing, someone's life. And that one day you're going to be at a book signing, or maybe just at Barnes & Noble, doing a book reading, and someone's going to come up to you and they're going to say, I love your book. Thank you so much. You saved my marriage, saved my life. It made me think differently. It gave me so many new ideas. That right there is that moment. That moment right there is going to be worth its weight in gold. And it's not that you have to look for that moment, because that moment's all going to come. It's just natural. Similar to how if you open the door for someone and you let them through, you might get a thank you. Have a nice day. Good morning. Good evening. It's not that it's expected. It's just that the probability is very high. So if you're in the market for a book coach, then Caroline is going to be available. I encourage you to check her out and to really get your ideas on paper. Because if you think for a moment that your idea is not worth it, or that you don't have anything to share, think again, because you have something that no one else can write. Your life and your experiences and your circumstances and your wisdom is going to create a unique story that no one can replicate. There might be many stories that come that are similar to yours, but there's no story that would be exactly like yours. So dare to defy your limiting beliefs and the limiting beliefs from other people, and choose to become a writer. Choose to write your book, write your manuscript, write whatever you want, so that you can create an awareness to what you're saying. Whether you get the fulfillment or the world gets the fulfillment, it is all up to you, and it's all up to your interpretation. My name is Michael Rearden. I'm a mindset coach. If you have any questions, you can email me, coachinginsession@gmail.com, and I will see everyone on the next episode of Coaching in Session. Until then, everyone, take care.